Picture this moment that happens in thousands of homes right now. A mother sits on the floor with her 8-month-old baby, phone in one hand, feeding bottle propped up with a pillow in the other. The television flashes bright colors in the background. The baby's eyes dart between the screen and the device, never quite settling, never quite connecting. She doesn't notice the subtle signs, the way his gaze slides past her face, the absence of that reaching gesture babies naturally make toward their parents. She's exhausted, doing her best, following what she sees everywhere around her. But what she doesn't know is that 9 seemingly innocent daily habits, things that modern parenting culture has normalized, are quietly reshaping her baby's developing brain in ways that won't become visible until much later. Some of these patterns can mask early signs of autism, making it harder for parents and professionals to identify when a child needs support. Others create developmental delays that mimic neurodevelopmental differences, confusing the picture entirely. And here's what makes this so urgent. The first 3 years of a child's life represent the most critical window for brain development that will ever exist. During this period, a baby's brain forms more than 1 million neural connections every single second. Every interaction, every moment of presence or absence, every sensory experience is literally building the architecture of who this child will become. Yet we're living in a time when the very habits meant to soothe, entertain, or simply get through the day are working against this miraculous process. And most parents have no idea. Let's start with something that feels completely harmless, something recommended by well-meaning relatives and even some outdated parenting advice. Extended pacifier use beyond the first year of life. On the surface, it seems innocent. A baby is soothed, parents get relief, everyone sleeps. But here's what's happening beneath that calm exterior. When a baby has a pacifier constantly in their mouth, especially during waking hours, it creates a physical barrier to one of the most essential developmental activities of early childhood: babbling. Those seemingly random sounds, the ba-ba-ba, the da-da-da, the endless vocal experimentation that parents sometimes find amusing or annoying, that's not just noise. That's brain development in action. When babies babble, they're practicing the motor movements needed for speech. They're learning to control their tongue, lips, and breath. They're experimenting with cause and effect, discovering that the sounds they make can get responses from caregivers. They're building the neural pathways that will eventually become language. But a pacifier occupies the exact space needed for this practice. It restricts tongue movement. It reduces the baby's motivation to vocalize because their mouth is already occupied. Studies have shown that excessive pacifier use correlates with delayed speech development, reduced vocabulary at age 2 and 3, and decreased verbal interaction with caregivers. Now here's where this connects to autism identification. One of the early indicators that parents and pediatricians watch for is babbling patterns. Typically developing babies progress through predictable stages of vocal development. Babies who will later be diagnosed with autism often show differences in this progression. They might babble less, start babbling later, or show less variety in their sounds. But if a child is using a pacifier constantly, these natural indicators get obscured. The delay in babbling might be attributed to the pacifier rather than recognized as a potential developmental concern. Parents and doctors might think, once we remove the pacifier, the speech will come. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. And in those cases, valuable months of early intervention are lost. The second habit is even more pervasive and socially accepted. Screen exposure before age 2, and excessive screen time after that age. We're not talking about the occasional video call with grandparents or a few minutes of a carefully chosen educational program. We're talking about babies propped in front of tablets during meals, toddlers handed phones in the grocery store, background television running for hours every day. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no screen time for babies under 18 months, except video chatting, and no more than 1 hour of high-quality programming for children aged 2 to 5. Yet the average American child under 2 sees screens for more than 2 hours daily. What's happening in a baby's brain during screen exposure is profoundly different from what happens during real-world interaction. When a baby looks at a screen, they're processing two-dimensional images that change rapidly, often with exaggerated colors, movements, and sounds. This creates a level of stimulation that the developing brain is not designed to handle. It triggers dopamine release, creating a pattern of needing intense stimulation to maintain attention. But here's the devastating part. While the screen is on, the baby is not engaging in the activities that build brain architecture. They're not making eye contact with caregivers. They're not practicing joint attention, that crucial skill where a baby looks at something, then looks at their parent to share the experience, then looks back. They're not responding to the subtle facial expressions and vocal tones that teach emotional regulation. They're not manipulating objects with their hands, which builds spatial reasoning and problem solving. They're passive receivers rather than active participants in their own development. Research has now clearly established that screen time in the first years of life is associated with language delays, attention difficulties, reduced social skills, and importantly, behaviors that can look similar to autism spectrum characteristics. A child who has spent extensive time with screens might show reduced eye contact, not because of an underlying neurological difference, but because they've been conditioned to focus on screens rather than faces. They might show repetitive behaviors, not because of autism, but because they're imitating what they've seen on videos. They might have meltdowns when screens are removed, not because of sensory sensitivities, but because their dopamine regulation has been shaped by screen exposure. This creates a confusing picture for everyone involved. Is this child showing signs of autism, or are these behaviors the result of screen exposure? Often, it's impossible to tell without removing screens entirely for several months and observing what changes. But by the time parents realize this might be an issue, patterns are deeply established and harder to shift. The third dangerous habit is something that might surprise you because it's often done with the best intentions. Constant background noise. Many parents believe that babies should get used to noise, that they'll sleep better if they learn to sleep through household sounds, that having the television or music playing all day creates a stimulating environment. The opposite is true. A baby's auditory system is designed to filter and focus on the most important sounds in their environment, primarily human speech and especially the voices of their primary caregivers. When there's constant background noise, whether it's television, music, or even white noise machines running all day, the baby's brain cannot effectively distinguish foreground from background. Everything becomes noise. This has a direct impact on language development. Babies learn language not by hearing lots of words, but by hearing words clearly, in context, with emotional connection and back and forth interaction. When a parent talks to their baby in a quiet environment, the baby can hear the distinct sounds of language, the prosody, the pauses, the variations in tone that carry meaning. When that same parent talks to their baby with a television playing in the background, the baby receives a muddled acoustic signal. Their brain has to work much harder to separate the meaningful speech from the background noise, and often it simply cannot. Research has shown that every hour of background television is associated with a reduction in the number of words babies hear from their caregivers, the number of vocalizations babies make themselves, and the number of conversational turns between parent and child. This creates what researchers call a language nutrition deficit. And here's the connection to autism identification. Children with autism often show differences in how they process auditory information. They might be oversensitive to certain sounds, or undersensitive to others. They might have difficulty filtering relevant sounds from background noise. But if a typically developing child has been raised in an environment of constant background noise, they too might show difficulties with auditory processing, trouble focusing on speech, delayed language development, and behavioral responses to overwhelming soundscapes that can look similar to sensory sensitivities associated with autism. Once again, the developmental picture becomes unclear. The fourth habit is the decline of floor time and unrestricted movement. Modern baby equipment, while convenient, often restricts a baby's natural movement in ways that impact brain development. Babies spending hours in car seats, bouncers, swings, and containers of various kinds are not getting the movement experiences their brains need. When a baby lies on their back on the floor and struggles to roll over, they're not just building muscle strength. They're developing vestibular sense, the awareness of body position in space. They're learning about cause and effect as their movements produce results. They're building the neural connections between the two hemispheres of their brain as they coordinate movements across the midline of their body. They're experiencing proprioception, the sense of where their body parts are without looking at them. These sensory motor experiences form the foundation for everything that comes later, including attention, emotional regulation, and social interaction. When babies spend most of their waking hours in containers, they miss out on these crucial experiences. They don't build the same core strength, the same balance, the same body awareness. And these differences can manifest in ways that look like developmental delays or even autism-related characteristics. A child with poor vestibular development might seek intense movement, spinning, crashing, rocking, as their body tries to get the sensory input it needs. A child with weak proprioception might have difficulty with motor planning, appearing clumsy or hesitant in movement. A child who hasn't had adequate tummy time might struggle with activities that require visual tracking or hand-eye coordination. These are also characteristics that can appear in autism, creating another layer of confusion in early identification. But the root cause is different. These children aren't showing neurological differences, they're showing the effects of restricted movement opportunities. Their brains are developing typically but in an atypical environment. The fifth habit involves something that many parents do to help their babies sleep, and it's become an entire industry. Sound machines running all night, every night, at levels that can actually interfere with healthy auditory development. While short-term use of white noise at appropriate volumes can help some babies sleep, constant exposure to these sounds, especially at high volumes, can impact the way a baby's auditory cortex develops. The brain during sleep is not simply resting. It's consolidating the learning that happened during the day. It's building and strengthening neural connections. It's processing experiences and integrating them into developing systems. When there's constant noise during sleep, even white noise, the brain cannot fully rest. The auditory system remains partially activated, processing the sound even during sleep. Over time, this can affect how efficiently the brain processes auditory information during waking hours. Some children develop what appears to be auditory processing difficulties, not because of an inherent neurological difference, but because their auditory system never learned to function in quiet. They become dependent on background noise to fall asleep, and they struggle to focus on speech in noisy environments because their brain never developed strong skills for filtering sound. Again, these can look like sensory processing differences associated with autism, leading to confusion about whether a child needs evaluation for autism spectrum disorder or intervention for environmentally caused auditory processing challenges. The sixth dangerous habit is the reduction of face-to-face interaction, replaced by side-by-side or distracted caregiving. This is perhaps the most insidious pattern because it doesn't look like a problem on the surface. A parent is with their child. They're in the same room. The baby is safe. But the parent is also scrolling through their phone, or watching television, or mentally planning the next task. The baby makes a sound. The parent responds without making eye contact, without matching their emotional tone to the baby's, without that moment of true connection. This happens dozens or hundreds of times a day. Each instance might seem small, but the cumulative effect is profound. Babies learn about emotions, about social connection, about their own significance in the world through face-to-face interaction. When a baby smiles and their parent smiles back with genuine delight, matching the baby's emotional state, the baby's brain is learning that their feelings matter, that emotional communication works, that connection feels good. When a baby babbles and their parent responds with animated facial expressions and vocal engagement, the baby is learning the back and forth rhythm of conversation, the joy of communication, the power of their own voice. But when these moments are absent or diminished, when the parent is physically present but emotionally absent, the baby's brain receives different information. The baby learns that emotional bids don't consistently get responses. That connection is unreliable. That faces are less interesting than they should be. Over time, some babies stop making as many bids for interaction. They don't reach toward parents as often. They don't maintain eye contact as long. They become more self-focused, finding ways to entertain themselves rather than seeking connection. And these behaviors, reduced social initiation, decreased eye contact, preference for solitary play, these are also early signs of autism. So when a toddler shows these characteristics, is it autism, or is it the result of thousands of missed connection moments? Sometimes it's impossible to tell without changing the pattern and observing what happens. But that requires parents to first recognize that the pattern exists, which is difficult when distracted caregiving has become the cultural norm. The seventh habit is something that's rarely discussed but incredibly impactful. The absence of boredom. Modern parenting often operates from a belief that babies and toddlers should be constantly entertained, constantly stimulated, always engaged with something new and exciting. Baby classes, educational toys, rotation of activities, carefully curated experiences. When a baby starts to fuss or show signs of restlessness, many parents immediately intervene with a new toy, a different activity, a change of scenery. But here's what we've learned about brain development and creativity. Boredom is not the enemy. Boredom is the space where imagination develops. When a baby or toddler has nothing to do, no toys in front of them, no screens, no adult-directed activity, something remarkable happens. They start to engage with their own mind. They notice things they wouldn't otherwise notice, the way light moves across a wall, the sound of their own breathing, the sensation of their hands touching each other. They begin to create their own play, experimenting with their voice, moving their body in new ways, finding interest in simple objects. This self-directed exploration is how creativity develops. It's how attention span builds. It's how children learn to regulate their own emotional states without constant external input. But when children are never bored, when every moment is filled with external stimulation, they don't develop these skills. They become dependent on external entertainment for emotional regulation. They struggle with unstructured time. They show difficulty with independent play, with focus, with patience. And once again, these characteristics can resemble autism-related traits. Difficulty with transitions, need for constant stimulation, trouble with independent play. But the root cause is different. The brain has been conditioned to expect constant external input rather than developing its own internal resources. The eighth habit is feeding practices that eliminate the sensory and social aspects of eating. Babies being fed while watching screens, or propped up alone with a bottle, or given only smooth purees well past the age when they should be experiencing varied textures. Eating is not just about nutrition. For a baby, every meal is a multisensory learning experience. The texture of food in their mouth teaches them about the world. The social interaction during feeding teaches them about connection, turn-taking, and communication. The experience of hunger and satisfaction teaches them about their own body's signals. When these elements are removed, when feeding becomes a mechanical process to get food into the child rather than an interactive experience, multiple areas of development are impacted. Children might develop oral motor difficulties because they haven't practiced with varied textures. They might have sensory sensitivities around food because they haven't been gradually exposed to different sensations. They might struggle with social aspects of eating because mealtimes were never social experiences. And importantly, they might miss early communication practice that happens naturally during feeding. A baby looks at the spoon, then at the parent, then opens their mouth. That's joint attention. A baby indicates they want more or they're finished through gestures, sounds, or body language. That's early communication. When feeding happens in front of a screen or without interaction, these learning opportunities disappear. Later, when the child shows difficulty with eating, with sensory experiences around food, or with communication during mealtimes, parents and professionals have to untangle whether these are autism-related characteristics or the result of feeding practices that eliminated crucial learning opportunities. The ninth and final habit is perhaps the most controversial because it's so deeply embedded in modern life. The absence of nature, of outdoor time, of sensory experiences beyond the controlled indoor environment. Babies and toddlers spending nearly all their time indoors, in temperature-controlled spaces, with artificial lighting, on flat floors, looking at manufactured objects. The developing brain expects and needs a certain kind of sensory diversity that only the natural world provides. The feeling of grass under bare feet, the sight of leaves moving in wind, the sound of birds, the smell of earth, the experience of weather on skin. These aren't luxury experiences. They're fundamental developmental nutrition. When babies are primarily indoors, they miss this sensory diversity. They become accustomed to a very narrow range of sensory experiences, which can lead to sensory sensitivities when exposed to anything outside that range. A child who has rarely felt different textures might refuse to walk on grass. A child who has only experienced artificial light might be overwhelmed by bright sunlight. A child who has only heard indoor sounds might find outdoor environments unbearably noisy. These sensory sensitivities, this difficulty with environmental changes, these are also characteristics associated with autism. But again, the question becomes, is this neurodevelopmental difference, or is this the predictable result of a sensorially restricted environment? The answer matters because it determines what kind of support the child needs. Now here's what makes all of this so complex and so important to understand. Many of these 9 habits don't exist in isolation. In most modern homes, several or all of them are happening simultaneously. A baby might be in a bouncy seat, in front of a screen, with background television playing, while the parent scrolls through their phone, with a pacifier in their mouth, having never been outside that day. Each individual habit compounds the effects of the others. And the cumulative impact on brain development can be substantial. But here's the crucial point that parents need to understand. This is not about guilt. This is not about blaming parents who are doing their best in a culture that has normalized these patterns. Every parent using these habits is doing so with good intentions, trying to soothe their baby, get through the day, follow advice they've received, or simply survive the overwhelming demands of early parenting. The issue is not parental failure. The issue is that our modern lifestyle has drifted far from what babies' brains are designed to expect, and we're seeing the consequences in rising rates of developmental delays, speech delays, attention difficulties, and yes, autism diagnoses. Some of those diagnoses are identifying children who genuinely have autism and need support. But some of those diagnoses are capturing children whose development has been shaped by environmental factors that mimic autism characteristics. And some children have both, an underlying predisposition toward autism that is either masked or exacerbated by environmental factors. The only way to know the difference is to change the environment and observe what happens. This means removing screens entirely for several months. It means eliminating background noise and creating quiet space for language development. It means giving babies extensive floor time for unrestricted movement. It means face-to-face interaction, unhurried and focused, multiple times throughout each day. It means allowing boredom and supporting self-directed play. It means making mealtime social, interactive experiences with varied textures and tastes. It means daily outdoor time experiencing natural sensory diversity. It means restricting pacifier use to sleep times only. It means creating space for a baby's brain to develop in an environment more aligned with what evolution prepared it for. When these changes happen, some children show remarkable transformation. Speech that was delayed begins to emerge. Eye contact increases. Social engagement improves. Behaviors that looked like autism characteristics diminish or disappear. These children were never on the autism spectrum. They were showing the effects of a sensorially and socially impoverished environment. Other children show some improvement but continue to demonstrate characteristics consistent with autism. For these children, the environmental changes support their development and make their true neurological profile more visible, allowing for earlier and more accurate identification and intervention. And some children show minimal change. These are often children with more significant autism characteristics who need specialized support regardless of environmental factors. But in all cases, these changes benefit the child. Because even if a child does have autism, they still benefit from reduced screen time, more face-to-face interaction, diverse sensory experiences, and all the other elements of a developmentally supportive environment. The tragedy is that most parents never have the opportunity to try this experiment because they don't know these patterns or problems until much later, after habits are deeply established, after critical windows have passed, after development has already been shaped in particular directions. And by then, changing patterns is much harder for everyone involved. So what does this mean for you, if you're a parent or caregiver of a baby or young child right now? It means that the most powerful intervention you can provide is also the simplest. Presence. Not perfect presence, not Instagram-worthy presence, just consistent, genuine human connection. It means putting the phone down during playtime. It means turning off the television and creating quiet. It means getting down on the floor with your baby and following their lead in play. It means going outside every day, even if it's just to the backyard or a local park. It means letting your baby experience textures, temperatures, movements that might be slightly uncomfortable but are developmentally essential. It means allowing moments of struggle without immediately intervening. It means trusting that your baby doesn't need constant entertainment, they need you. Your face, your voice, your emotional attunement, your patience with their pace of learning. These are the things that build brains. Not the latest educational toy, not the baby class, not the screen time educational program. You. Your attention, your delight in them, your calm presence during difficult moments. This is what their brain is expecting and needing. And if you're reading this and recognizing that many of these 9 habits are present in your home, the response is not panic or guilt. The response is information and change. Starting today, you can begin shifting these patterns. Not all at once, not perfectly, but gradually and consistently. You can reduce screen time by 10 minutes today and 20 tomorrow. You can turn off background television and notice what happens in the quiet. You can put your phone in another room during floor play and observe your baby with full attention. You can take your baby outside for 15 minutes and let them touch grass, feel wind, hear birds. Each small change creates space for healthier development. Each moment of true connection builds the neural architecture your baby needs. And if you have concerns about your child's development, if you're noticing differences in how they interact, communicate, or engage with the world, these environmental changes don't replace professional evaluation. They complement it. They create the clearest possible picture of your child's true developmental profile by removing the confounding factors that can mask or mimic autism characteristics. Your child deserves both. The most supportive environment possible and appropriate evaluation and intervention if needed. They're not in competition. They work together. The brain science is clear. The research is established. The first 3 years of life represent an opportunity that will never come again. A baby's brain is waiting for specific kinds of experiences, connection, movement, sensory diversity, language interaction, uninterrupted presence. When those experiences are absent or replaced with artificial substitutes, development shifts in measurable ways. Sometimes those shifts resolve when the environment changes. Sometimes they don't. But either way, every baby deserves the chance to develop in an environment that supports rather than hinders the remarkable process of becoming human. Your baby doesn't need you to be perfect. Your baby needs you to be present. And now you know what that presence looks like in practical terms. Quiet spaces for language to develop. Movement opportunities for the brain and body to integrate. Sensory experiences that build resilience rather than sensitivity. Face-to-face connection that teaches emotion, communication, and trust. The absence of screens that allows attention to develop naturally. Space for boredom that cultivates creativity and self-regulation. Interactive mealtimes that combine nutrition with learning. Daily outdoor time that provides the sensory diversity the brain expects. and restricted pacifier use that allows for vocal development and verbal interaction. These aren't luxury additions to parenting. They're fundamental elements of the environment babies' brains are designed to develop within. And when that environment is present, brains flourish in ways that screens and containers and constant stimulation simply cannot replicate. This is the gift you can give your child starting right now. Not perfect parenting, but present parenting. Not expensive interventions, but environmental alignment. Not guilt about the past, but clarity about moving forward. Because every moment from this point on is an opportunity. Your baby's brain is still developing those 1 million connections per second. Still waiting for experiences that matter. Still ready to grow in remarkable ways when given what it truly needs. And what it truly needs is simpler than our complex modern world would have you believe. It needs you, fully present, creating space for connection, movement, language, and exploration. That's where development happens. That's where brains flourish. That's where your child's potential unfolds exactly as it's meant to.